Breaking. Rioters set police cars on fire and pepper spray ice. 97 arrested in raids. Now let's get into the details.
Of government corruption by imposing a 5-year ban on lobbying by executive branch officials and a lifetime ban.
What happens when a major American city crosses the invisible line separating dissent from outright insurrection? That question electrified Los Angeles on a June night when a single spark federal immigration raids triggered a chain reaction that would push the nation's security apparatus into its most volatile domestic confrontation since the protests of 2020. Streets convulsed with flames, squad cars burned, federal agents were pepper sprayed in broad daylight, and for hours one of the world's most famous cities looked less like a symbol of American prosperity and more like a pressure chamber on the brink of rupture. The first wave of unrest erupted downtown near Los Angeles Street. Crowds surged through intersections, hurling rocks, glass bottles, and commercial-grade fireworks from overpasses. According to federal summaries, the assaults hit with lethal force bricks and concrete chunks rained down on California highway patrol vehicles. A federal contract employee was hospitalized after a rock shattered her window and struck her head. Reuters later described the scene as urban battlefield conditions unusual even for a city accustomed to civil protest. By midnight, smoke curled through corridors of broken glass. Officers were overwhelmed. LAPD Chief Jim McDonald called it one of the most dangerous nights in years as his unit struggled to contain coordinated flash mobs that appeared, attacked, and vanished. But the chaos did not fade, it evolved. 2 days later, more than 2,000 demonstrators marched onto the 101 freeway, shutting down a major artery and trapping commuters for hours. NBC Los Angeles reported that 5 Waymo autonomous taxis were smashed, spray-painted, then torched. Fire commanders warned that the battery chemistry inside the vehicles posed a catastrophic risk. Flames surged past 1,000 degrees Celsius, generating toxic fumes that forced firefighters to cordon off entire blocks. President Donald Trump, monitoring the situation from Washington, called the events an organized assault on federal authority. BBC News noted that similar patterns had emerged during clashes in Portland and Chicago. Rapid mobilization, highly aggressive tactics, and ideological networks coordinating disruptions through encrypted channels. Los Angeles was now the flashpoint. The violence expanded beyond the city core. In early July, federal agents conducting a lawful search at a Camarillo marijuana farm were confronted by a convoy of activists blocking their vehicles. DHS reports later detailed by The Guardian described burning debris hurled at agents as they attempted to withdraw. The confrontation marked a shift. Protests were no longer symbolic displays, they challenged federal jurisdiction outright. But beneath the headlines and political statements lay a deeper narrative. For many residents, shop owners, commuters, and workers, the city felt abandoned. Streets closed for days, windows were shattered, revenue evaporated. Families living near the flashpoint spoke to DW about nights spent listening to explosions, unsure if their neighborhoods would be next. Children were kept home from school. Small businesses watched months of recovery vanish in a single evening. All the while, the balance between security and freedom grew sharper. Where does lawful protest end? Where does violent resistance begin? And what does a federal government do when a city becomes both a battleground and a symbol of its struggle to maintain authority? As Los Angeles burned and the nation watched, one question hung heavier than the smoke drifting over downtown. If this is only the beginning, what comes next? And will America be ready for it? The violence did not dissipate with the sunrise. Instead, it spread, morphing into a rolling wave of confrontation that tested federal authority across Southern California. What began as spontaneous clashes soon looked like a challenge to the very idea of law enforcement. And in a nation already strained by political divides, immigration battles, and global tensions, the stakes felt far larger than Los Angeles itself. The spark that accelerated everything came on the freeway. More than 2,000 protesters flooded the 101, halting traffic in all lanes, trapping families, commuters, and trucks carrying critical goods. According to BBC correspondents on the ground, the blockade appeared coordinated, not chaotic. Demonstrators moved in tight groups using scouts stationed on overpasses to track CHP deployments. When police attempted to push forward, the crowd turned violent. Fireworks detonated between officers. Bottles and rocks crashed against shields. Then came the moment that stunned national observers: the destruction of the Waymo autonomous taxis. These were not ordinary vehicles, they carried lithium-ion battery modules capable of releasing explosive levels of heat. When rioters punctured one with a metal rod and ignited it, Defense News later explained how thermal runaway reactions created temperatures hot enough to vaporize aluminum frames. Toxic gas drifted through downtown streets, forcing firefighters into defensive postures. It was no longer simple vandalism, it was a mass casualty risk. Far from the city center, tensions escalated even more dramatically. At a marijuana farm outside Camarillo, Homeland Security agents executing a federal warrant found themselves encircled by activists who arrived in a convoy of vehicles. According to DHS field notes summarized by The Guardian, the group used their cars to physically trap the federal convoy inside the property. Agents trying to withdraw were met with burning debris rocks in attempts to breach their vehicles. A single misstep could have turned the raid into a deadly ambush. Al Jazeera's reporting highlighted growing fears among federal agencies. The lines between activism, resistance, and organized violence were blurring. If protesters could mobilize within minutes, appear at targeted locations, and overwhelm units trained for high-risk operations, what did that signal for future federal law enforcement missions? And was Los Angeles the test case for a wider national challenge? President Donald Trump, facing pressure from business leaders and state officials, ordered 2,000 National Guard troops to Los Angeles, yet only 300 arrived within the first 24 hours. Reuters journalists noted that deployment delays raised concerns about whether federal resources could respond fast enough in sprawling cities. Meanwhile, anger intensified on the ground. Local officials argued that federal raids had ignited the unrest. Federal commanders countered that city authorities had allowed extremist groups to operate unchecked. Trust was evaporating. But behind the political rhetoric was a sobering reality: ordinary residents were paying the highest price. DW interviewed shop owners who watched their storefronts destroyed within minutes. Families avoided entire districts after dark. Immigrants caught between ICE operations and street violence feared both sides. Some community leaders warned that crackdowns could ignite even more resistance. What happens to a city when every actor, federal agents, police, protesters, politicians, believes the other is responsible for the escalation? And if confrontation becomes the norm rather than the exception, how long before one wrong decision pushes the situation beyond control? As tensions mounted and the summer burned on, a quieter, more deliberate response began to take shape, one that would change everything. Inside the federal building in downtown Los Angeles, a different kind of battle was taking shape, quiet, methodical, and far more consequential than anything unfolding on the streets. While the city tried to recover from burned vehicles, blocked freeways, and nightly clashes, federal agencies were already preparing a counterstrike. And unlike the riots, this response would not be chaotic, it would be precise. The turning point came when DHS analysts began reviewing the footage, hundreds of hours from news reporters, traffic cameras, private businesses, drones, and even the rioters' own live stream. According to Reuters security analysts, the federal review looked less like a criminal inquiry and more like the reconstruction of a battlefield. Masks and hoodies made identification difficult, but not impossible. Agents slowed videos frame by frame, isolating distinctive clothing tattoos, vehicle plates, and even hand gestures used as signals in the crowd. What they uncovered was chilling. The same individuals who had smashed Waymo taxis on the 101 appeared again in footage from the Camarillo farm raid. Others who assaulted federal agents downtown later surfaced in encrypted group chats, organizing new disruptions. According to BBC investigations, teams federal agencies began mapping out what looked increasingly like a coordinated network, one that moved faster than local police could respond and functioned across multiple jurisdictions. The deeper analysts dug, the clearer the pattern became. Encrypted Telegram channels, disappearing messages, and coordinated rapid response calls formed the backbone of these mobilizations. Members of these networks used coded language to identify ongoing ICE operations and dispatch activists to the scene in minutes. Jane's Defense Weekly compared the structure to a civilian insurgency model where small groups use speed and unpredictability to overwhelm official control. Federal officials were stunned to learn that these groups were neither fringe nor isolated. One network, known as VC Defensa, operated with military-style discipline, tracking federal vehicles, photographing agents, attempting to dox law enforcement officers, and blocking withdrawal routes during operations. The Guardian later reported that similar groups had appeared in cities like Portland, Seattle, and Chicago, each adapting tactics used in Los Angeles. To the agents reviewing the data, it became clear the riots were not simply emotional, spontaneous outbursts. They were part of a larger, evolving strategy aimed at crippling federal enforcement capabilities. And in a geopolitical climate where the US was juggling tensions with China, Russia, and shifting alliances in the Middle East, internal chaos carried global consequences. How could Washington project strength abroad if it could not secure its own streets? President Donald Trump privately demanded results. According to DW diplomatic correspondence, the administration saw the unrest as a direct challenge to national authority during a period of heightened global competition. The credibility of federal power was on the line. The DOJ authorized a sweeping multi-agency operation. ATF explosives experts cross-referenced burned vehicle fragments. FBI analysts used AI-enhanced facial tracking tools. DHS teams linked online posts to physical attacks. Step by step, a manhunt took shape, cold calculated and built to survive scrutiny in court. Months after the streets had quieted, federal agents had what they needed: names, faces, vehicles, timestamps, locations. Nearly 100 suspects were identified, indictments were drafted, arrest teams assembled. The summer violence had lit the fuse. The federal response was now the explosion. But with the stage set for one of the largest anti-riot crackdowns in modern Los Angeles history, another question emerged once the government strikes back. Does it calm a city or fracture it even further? Before dawn broke over Southern California, the quiet suburban streets of Los Angeles Ventura County and the San Fernando Valley filled with the low rumble of armored engines. Flashing lights remained off. Radios whispered. Federal agents moved with surgical precision. After months of investigation, the government was ready to strike back, and this time the operation would be theirs to control. The first raid began at 4:17 a.m. A joint task force, Homeland Security, FBI, and ATF formed a silent column outside a small duplex in South Los Angeles. Inside was Isaiah Carrillo, the man captured on video smashing federal vehicle windows with a metal pole during the Camarillo raid. According to Reuters, agents had tracked him for weeks, piecing together his movements from phone metadata and eyewitness testimony. When the door finally opened, Carrillo attempted to flee out the back. He didn't make it 10 feet. Minutes later, another team moved on a second target in Ventura County, Virginia, Reyes, a key agitator accused of using her vehicle to trap federal agents during the July confrontation. The Guardian reported that Reyes had become one of the most active anti-ICE organizers in the region, filming agents at close range and attempting to identify undercover officers. When agents approached her home, she tried to grab her phone, likely to wipe it. She was stopped instantly. But these two arrests were only the beginning. Across the region, 12 suspects were captured in the first wave alone. ATF teams seized incendiary materials used to ignite Waymo taxis. FBI tech units recovered hard drives filled with encrypted chats from rapid response networks. Al Jazeera described the raids as one of the largest coordinated anti-riot crackdowns in recent California history. As federal transport vans rolled out, more arrests followed. Within days, the number climbed past 97. According to BBC News, 39 suspects were indicted by a federal grand jury, and 18 pleaded guilty before their initial hearings even concluded. The DOJ emphasized the seriousness. The charges included assaulting federal officers, obstructing law enforcement, destroying government property, conspiracy, and incitement. Some carried statutory maximums of 20 years. Inside the command center, analysts watched the arrests unfold in real time. Every name checked off the list represented months of digital tracing, facial recognition matches, social media triangulation, and public tips. The operation wasn't just a show of force, it was a demonstration of capability. Jane's Defense Weekly noted that the raids served as a warning to extremist networks that federal agencies were willing to mobilize complex multi-jurisdictional operations on short notice. Yet the crackdown also widened the political rift. Local officials argued the raids risked inflaming tensions. Federal authorities countered that failing to act would embolden violent groups nationwide. According to DW analysts, the debate reflected a deeper national tension, the struggle to balance civil liberties with the federal government's responsibility to maintain order. For residents who had watched their neighborhoods burn, the arrests brought a mixture of relief and unease. Shopkeepers whose businesses were destroyed hoped justice was finally coming. Parents who kept children home during the riots prayed the violence would not return. But some activists warned that federal power, once deployed at this scale, rarely retreats quietly. And looming over the entire operation was the same uneasy question circulating through law enforcement briefings, community meetings, and political circles. Would these arrests restore stability or push the next wave of unrest even closer to the breaking point? When the raids ended, the city expected relief. Instead, Los Angeles shifted from street battles to courtroom warfare. Federal vans escorted defendants into holding facilities. Prosecutors assembled evidence. Defense attorneys mobilized. And suddenly, what had played out in chaotic bursts of violence was now being dissected under fluorescent lights and legal scrutiny. The courthouse became a stage for competing narratives. On one side, federal prosecutors presented a methodical, overwhelming case. According to Reuters, they unveiled footage showing defendants lighting debris and launching it at CHP vehicles, smashing federal windshields, and participating in the coordinated burning of Waymo taxis. Frame by frame, they traced how individual suspects moved through the crowds during the riots, linking them to encrypted messages and rapid response networks. One case stood out a defendant who had rammed his vehicle into agents during a July confrontation. Prosecutors emphasized that the act was not impulsive but deliberate, a lethal attack on federal officers, the statutory maximum up to 20 years in prison. BBC legal analysts noted that prosecutors weren't simply arguing guilt, they were establishing a principle violence against federal officers was a direct attack on national authority. With President Donald Trump publicly backing the crackdown, the trials carried strategic weight. A lenient outcome risked signaling weakness during a period when global powers were closely watching American cohesion. Defense attorneys countered fiercely. They insisted that many clients were peaceful protesters swept into chaos. Some argued that DHS and FBI had overstepped using mass surveillance tools that blurred constitutional boundaries. Civil rights groups interviewed by The Guardian claimed the government was criminalizing dissent and exploiting the riots to justify excessive policing power. Inside the courtroom, emotions ran high. Families of defendants packed the benches. Business owners who had lost everything described nights spent watching flames rise over their storefronts. Federal officers testified about concussions, burns, and assault injuries. DW reported that several officers still suffered lingering trauma from the riots, describing the attacks as organized brutality. But beyond the testimony and legal arguments lay a deeper national tension, the fracture between public security and civil freedoms. Al Jazeera highlighted how minority communities feared that federal crackdowns could become the new norm. Meanwhile, residents of hard-hit districts demanded even stronger enforcement, saying they felt abandoned during the worst nights of violence. At the heart of it all was trust: who had it, who lost it, and who wanted it restored. Prosecutors spoke of accountability. Activists spoke of government overreach. Federal agents described the riots as a near collapse of local order. Shop owners described a city that had become unrecognizable overnight. And hovering over every ruling, every indictment, and every legal challenge was a single strategic reality: how America handled these trials would shape how future protests and future unrest would be treated across the country. If the court struck hard, would it deter violence nationwide, or would heavy sentences turn defendants into symbols fueling the next wave of resistance? As verdicts approached, Los Angeles once again found itself holding its breath, caught between justice fear and an uncertain future. By autumn, Los Angeles had become more than a case file. It was a national warning cited in federal briefings, police academies, and intelligence reports across the United States. What began as a local clash now shaped the country's blueprint for dealing with unrest. And as cities studied the footage of burning taxis and ambush convoys, one question kept resurfacing: what happens when the next protest turns violent without warning? The lessons were sobering. According to Reuters, federal agencies concluded that modern unrest no longer followed predictable patterns. Violence could ignite within minutes. Encrypted channels could mobilize hundreds faster than traditional policing could respond. And networks like VC Defensa demonstrated how loosely organized groups could strain federal resources in ways previously unseen. DHS and FBI leaders, citing the Los Angeles experience, issued new rules of engagement. Riot units would now train with real-time intelligence support. Facial recognition analysts would be embedded inside operations centers, and agencies would share protest-related data across state lines instantly, a system The Guardian described as the first nationwide anti-riot information architecture in modern US history. But the evolution did not stop at policing. According to DW security reporters, federal briefings now referenced LA-style escalation risk when assessing upcoming demonstrations in Chicago, Seattle, and New York. That phrase LA-style became shorthand for flash violence, a sudden leap from chance to burning vehicles, from signs to improvised weapons, from lawful dissent to mass felony charges. Meanwhile, global observers watched closely, with President Donald Trump asserting a hard line on internal security. Analysts from BBC and Al Jazeera noted that America's ability to maintain domestic stability was becoming a factor in its diplomatic posture. Rivals abroad interpreted unrest not simply as civic turmoil, but as a measure of American vulnerability. If federal agents could be overwhelmed on US streets, what did that mean for Washington's credibility in foreign crises? To counter that perception, Defense News reported that federal and state authorities began integrating riot response into national readiness planning. Joint task forces drilled for scenarios involving blocked freeways, targeted assaults on government vehicles, and coordinated online disinformation. The Los Angeles footage became mandatory viewing in multiple federal academies. But while the government adapted, ordinary Americans lived with the aftermath. Shop owners returned to rebuild shattered storefronts. Families in downtown neighborhoods described lingering fear whenever helicopters passed overhead. Immigrant communities remained torn, caught between anxiety over ICE operations and fear of renewed street violence. And despite the arrests, networks responsible for the summer chaos did not disappear. The Guardian revealed that several groups simply changed aliases, migrated to new encrypted platforms, and resurfaced in smaller demonstrations across the West Coast. Federal agents, speaking anonymously to BBC, warned that the ecosystem of agitation was still intact, more cautious, but far from dismantled. This led to the most difficult question of all: had the sweeping federal crackdown restored order or merely forced the unrest underground? In Washington, officials insisted the strategy was working. Nearly 100 arrests, dozens of indictments, and public warnings from the DOJ sent a clear message: attacks on federal officers would not be tolerated. Yet civil rights organizations argued the opposite, that aggressive prosecutions risked triggering a backlash when the next major flashpoint emerged. And that flashpoint could come from anywhere: an immigration raid, a controversial traffic stop, a federal warrant served at the wrong address. In an age where a single video can mobilize thousands, America's margin for error had never been thinner, which left Los Angeles and the nation standing at a crossroads. The city had endured its trial by fire. The federal government had shown its power, but the deeper tensions, the ones that sparked the riots, still simmered beneath the surface. So the question now becomes, when the next crisis erupts, will America face another night like Los Angeles? Or has this awakening taught the nation how close the line is between protest and full-scale confrontation? And for viewers watching this unfold, stay vigilant, stay informed, and subscribe to follow how the next chapter of this national struggle will unfold. The Los Angeles riots of 2025 were more than a surge of local unrest. They became a national inflection point, reshaping how the United States understands protest violence and federal authority in an era of rapid mobilization. What began with clashes over immigration enforcement spiraled into freeway blockades, ambushed federal convoys, burning autonomous vehicles, and organized networks using encrypted channels to outmaneuver law enforcement. President Donald Trump's administration viewed the crisis as a direct challenge to federal legitimacy, prompting a sweeping manhunt and one of the largest anti-riot crackdowns in modern California history. Nearly 100 suspects were arrested, dozens indicted, and new federal protocols were established to track extremist networks, share intelligence across jurisdictions, and respond to flash violence within minutes. Yet the aftermath revealed deeper fractures between residents and authorities, activists and prosecutors, and communities fearful of both disorder and overreach. Civil rights groups warned of creeping federal power, while business owners and officers demanded accountability for the devastation. As cities nationwide integrate LA-style escalation into their planning, the country faces a pivotal question: has the crackdown restored stability or merely set the stage for the next eruption?